Okay, so I am just going to jump right into it. So today I'm going to start with a little bit about me, just for general curiosity's sake, and then I'll jump into what is nanotechnology and where you'll find it, how we make it, and why. Careers in nanotech, and then I'll allow some time for some questions. So, a bit about me. I am originally from rural Manitoba. My parents owned a truck stop, which you can see in the picture there. And so my family is not originally academics at all. And my childhood was not involving chemistry in any way, shape, or form. So I went to school to be a nurse at the University of Manitoba. I was unsuccessful in my nursing career, as you can now see. I ended up falling in love with chemistry in my first year and changing my major over and working with a professor, Dr. Torsten Hagman, on some research in quantum dots. And so that's what got me into nanotechnology. I started doing research with him when I was about 19 years old, and that was the joy of going to a smaller university, as I was able to get some really early experience and publications and exposure to the whole industry. I went on to do my PhD at Simon Fraser University, and then I was co-supervised by a professor at Queen's University. And so I did that in chemistry with a specialization in nanomaterials, and specifically, I worked on electrocatalytic materials for fuel cell applications during my PhD. And for that, I worked with Dr. Byron Gates and Dr. Gregory Yerkowitz. I then went and did a postdoc afterwards, which is basically where you're somewhere between a student and an employee within a research group. And there I studied materials, oil in water emulsions for enhanced oil recovery. And so I was studying with the Canada Excellence Research Chair in materials engineering for oil reservoirs. The titles get very long in some of these cases. And so that was Dr. Stephen Bryant, as well as Dr. Milana Trifkovic. From that group, I actually developed some tech that I spun out into a company called InnvTek, and ran that for a couple of years, and we developed membrane separators for battery technologies. And then I moved into industry and worked as a chemist in nano-optoelectronics. And now I run my own consulting firm, as well as the Chief Technology Officer for Nano-Lit. In addition to chemistry, I also get involved in philanthropy. So I originally really just enjoyed getting involved with the chemistry community. So I organized a couple conferences and student chapters. So that's the Electrochemical Student Society in B.C., as well as the Western Canadian Undergraduate Chemistry Conference, which we held in Winnipeg. And I also now volunteer with the Green Party of Alberta, where I am the critic for jobs, economy, and innovation, and the deputy leader. Okay, so now you have a somewhat of a background of how I got into nanotech. So what is nanotechnology? When you look online, you're going to find a variety of different definitions that will tell you what nanotechnology is. But essentially what nanotechnology is any tech that uses nanomaterials. And when we're talking about nanomaterials, it's any material that possesses at minimum one dimension in the nanoscale, which is 1 to 100 nanometers. And just to give you an idea of the scale that we're talking about, I have a little chart on here that I've pulled from online that shows that at the atom level, we're really talking about angstroms. When we're talking about bacteria and viruses, we're getting into the large nano to micro area. And we're in this in-between area where we're not molecules and we're not large systems that have a specific behavior. So when I say that only one dimension has to be defined to the nano range, that actually has some variation. So really what we do is we define nanomaterials by how many dimensions are confined in that nano range. So for a zero-dimensional nano material, what we're talking about is a nanoparticle. So it means that all 3 dimensions are confined to the nano phase. And for a one-dimensional, we have 2 dimensions are confined to nano. 2-dimensional, we have one dimension that is confined to nano. So it's really clear when we start to look at carbon nanostructures. So a 0-dimensional carbon nanostructure is a particle. A fullerene or a buckyball is something you might have heard of more commonly. As we go to 1 dimension, it's now extending along 1 dimension that is no longer confined to nano, and the other 2 dimensions are. When a 2-dimensional nanomaterial, what we're looking at is a plane or a sheet, and so something like graphene fits really well into that. And for 3-dimensional, what it means is we actually have an extended structure where everything is defined by nano properties, but there is a 3-dimensional extended structure. And so sometimes those are considered nanomaterials, sometimes those aren't. Kind of depends on where you're looking in literature. So I just have a couple images here of what sort of nanomaterials look like. Now, when we're looking at nanomaterials though, in fact, we're not looking at them from a visible eye perspective. So our eyes can only detect wavelengths from about 2 to 7 to 900 nanometers. So this is our visible range of light. And so when we're talking about a regular light microscope, it is using that visible range of light, so that when we view it in the eyepiece, we can see what we're looking at in a larger scale. Of course, when things become so small that they don't interact with those wavelengths of light, we can't use that to be able to differentiate those structures. So in fact, what we use to image nanostructures is an electron microscope. And so in this case, instead of having a light source, we have an electron source. This is treated very similarly to an optical microscope, but the optics are now made with magnets instead of with lenses. And then we image that by having a fluorescent plate. So essentially we're using the photoelectric effect where an electron hits a surface, it emits light, and that is what we're able to view on our monitor and be able to tell things in the micro, nano, and even picometer and angstrom scales. So why do people care about nano? The first one is the surface area to volume ratios. So when you are using a nanoparticle, you are going to have an incredibly large amount of surface area for the weight of that material. And so this graphic below displays that really nicely, where as you break a material into smaller and smaller pieces, the surface area of that material increases without having to increase the volume. Now, this is important for things where there is a surface mediated process. And so one of the main ones you're going to hear about is catalysis, but this is also incredibly important in nanomedicine applications. The other thing is that there's actual quantum confinement effects when it comes to nanomaterials. So as you start to scale materials from a micron or large scale into a nanoscale, you get quantum confinement of certain properties, and this can actually change how they behave. And yeah, of course, Ant-Man, because Ant-Man needs to ride a tardigrade if we're going to talk about quantum. So when I'm talking about quantum confinement, of course, the imagery is Ant-Man, but it's much less exciting in real life. So one of the most common examples that I've encountered in my work for quantum confinement in nanomaterials is quantum dots. And so in the case of quantum dots, essentially what we have is a semiconducting material. And so for those that are likely unfamiliar, a semiconductor is a material that can conduct electrons, just like platinum and gold and copper wires can, but they can only do so above a certain temperature. So there is a band or a gap in the energy between the ability to conduct electrons, the conduction band, and the inability to conduct electrons. So when you take these semiconducting materials and you start to compress them into the nanoscale, realistically, we're actually building them and only allowing them to grow to a nanoscale. We actually get a change in this band gap energy, and this changes their impact with light. And so quantum dots are well known now as materials that with different size actually exhibit different optical properties. So you can see here that if you take a couple different types of nano crystals that are all the same material, so in this case, I believe they're lead sulfide, and you take them at 6 nanometers versus 2 nanometers, they actually have different fluorescent emission properties. And so if you've heard of quantum dot technologies, that's now being released in a variety of different displays for Samsung with their QD and QD-O LED applications. So how do we make nanostructures? There's essentially two ways. The first is bottom up, so you can grow them via controlled crystal growth, and that can be done in a variety of different ways. And the basic mechanism of how that works is very similar to your crystal growing lab that you can pick up at any store. Whereas top down is a little bit different, where we actually remove other materials to reveal the nanostructure. So a mortar and pestle is an example of something that can be used to grind materials to micro levels. In some cases, you can actually grind them to nano levels. One of those cases is, in fact, graphite. If you take graphite and you exfoliate it via either a mechanical cleavage, so something like a mortar or pestle, or via a chemical method, you can reveal that graphene nanostructure. In another method to make graphene, though, you can actually grow graphene from a carbon source onto a surface, and that can create graphene from carbon. So those are that's a great example of getting to the same material from different approaches. So bottom up being building from elements, and top down being taking a material that already exists and breaking it down into that nanostructure. So I also, of course, am a synthetic chemist, and so I like doing lab synthesis. And so I wanted to show everyone an example. I don't know if this video is actually going to run. No, of course it won't. I can probably just pull that up at the end for anybody who's curious, but this is just an example of making some nanostructures from a bottom-up method where you are actually creating precursors and injecting them. So I am going to show that at the end. So of course, science isn't all just experimentation. There is a lot of fundamental things that we need to consider in order to make these reactions work the way that we want to. And so when it comes to nanomaterials, the two big topics that I think that really everybody needs to know in order to be successful in this is understandings of surface and interface science. And so this is just an example of Coulombic repulsion, but in general, surfaces can have so many different properties, from having charge to hydrophobicity and size and different orientations due to the crystal structure that can make such a big difference on how your nanomaterials grow. And so surface and interface science is a big part of that. The other thing is thermodynamics and kinetics. So as much as math is maybe not my favorite thing, and coding is by far not my favorite, I have found that a really good fundamental understanding of those things and understanding the theory and the fundamentals that go into these reactions becomes very important in being able to control your outcomes. So where do we actually use nanomaterials? I am not going to give you a full comprehensive example because honestly, they're really used a lot, but I'll give you a general example. So when we're talking about production and manufacturing, the two big examples that you're going to see are catalysis, where you're going to see things like catalytic converters and fuel cells and various types of chemical processes that are used in industry that require nanocatalysts. Another major market is in emulsions. So nanoparticles are really commonly used in industry to create skincare products as well as food products to stabilize oil and water and oil emulsions. And essentially every lotion and soap product you have is made from some sort of emulsifier combined with a variety of other things to help with skin. And so that's where you're going to see that one a lot. One of the more common ones is actually sunscreen. So sunscreen always contains titanium dioxide, and that's because at a nanoscale, it also absorbs a strong amount of UV light. So it's great for us that way. The other place that you're going to see nanomaterials is in battery and fuel cell, or really any electrochemical energy storage and transformation technology. So in a typical battery and fuel cell, you have a plastic piece that's in the middle, and you have two electrodes that are usually some sort of carbon composite with some other stuff. And that carbon composite with some other stuff is always incorporating nanomaterials, because you need to have a large amount of surface area in order for these processes to run effectively. I already touched on this, but the other thing is optical applications. So quantum dots are commonly used now in medical and LED and LCD display applications, as well as gold nanomaterials and a variety of other metal nanomaterials are used for laser-mediated nanoparticle treatment of cancer cells. So there's some really unique quantum confinement effects when it comes to metal nanoparticles for plasmonics. And so that's another large area in nanomaterials. And of course, nanomedicine is huge right now. Nanomaterials have the incredible capacity to be able to revolutionize drug delivery and to be able to bypass the blood-brain barrier and really do treatments in areas that we never thought we could before. And it's also great for imaging. With a lot of these nanomaterials, you can have properties that allow you to see things in the cells and tag things within the cells and within the body to be able to treat and diagnose. So if you've been convinced at this point that you want to go into nanotechnology and get through that process, now we can talk about careers. So the first career is obviously becoming a nanomaterial scientist. So material scientists are commonly employed throughout universities to run instrumentation. They are employed in industry to make materials and run instrumentation and build labs. And different industries, there's so many different industries that require material scientists, from food to consumer products and skincare to display applications and lighting tech and yeah, semiconductors, computer components, really everything. The other area you can get involved in is in government policy. So having a good understanding of these materials is important, especially as we're having to do more regulations for nanomaterials, as well as because nanomaterials are used in so many applications that are so important to current society. And so the government is commonly looking for people with nanomedicine or a nano energy background. You can also be an entrepreneur. A lot of people develop technologies in nanomaterials. There is a lot of tech space to be developed in. And if you dream of owning a startup and developing an idea all the way to getting it public, this is a way to do it. And this is just a quote that I like to end with. I believe that science is really important, and I think everybody is attending here today because they probably also believe the same. And thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pull up that video, but if anybody wants to ask any questions in the meantime. Might not let me. I don't see any burning questions, so I'm going to go ahead and describe what's happening here. So essentially what this chemist is doing is making some lead sulfide nanoparticles. And so he's starting by making a sulfur precursor. And everything is under inert atmospheres in the round flask on the right. So in one syringe here, he's, well, in the syringes here, he's got his sulfur precursor that he just prepared. And in the flask, he has his lead precursor that he has prepared before. So he goes ahead and injects that. And you'll see that originally the reaction is completely colorless. And as we go through this energy diagram that you can see on the bottom right, through the different energy barriers, we start to succumb that and create some of the products, and the products start kind of this yellowish color and go to deep brown as the size of the nanoparticles actually change. So originally we have small nanoparticles that are of this yellow color, and as they get larger and reach a stable size, you get this almost black brown color. And so, yeah, you can see that you can actually visualize the different size of the nanocrystals. This is a transmission electron microscope image. Okay, that is officially the conclusion to my presentation.
Oh, that was really cool. Oh, there was one question in the chat. So what courses should high school students take if they want to get into nanoscience?
I mean, that is a great question. I'm probably not a great person to answer that because I did not take anything in high school that pertained to going into a career in science. Other than making sure that I had taken pre-calculus so that I could get in, I didn't do any special requirements. I decided in my first year. So I would say that in general, having a really good foundation in math is probably the best thing that you can do, and chemistry and physics. But I am not a strong proponent of things like AP classes and forcing yourself to work too hard in high school. So I don't worry about it too much.
I also received a private message. The person asked, if you don't particularly like chemistry, should you not consider nanotechnology in university or in the future?
Absolutely not. Chemistry is not vital to nanotech at all. I joke that I do way more physics than I get to do chemistry on the best of days. So if you like physics, you're good there too. Nanotechnology really does span everything. So even in my career, I started in chemistry, but then I've been working in chemical engineering and physics and engineering since I left my like graduate school and completed my Ph.D. So it spans everywhere from electrical engineering to physics and chemistry and math. And yeah, chemical engineering and variety of others.
If there aren't any other questions from the participants, we do also have quite a few questions from our sign-up form, if you're willing to answer them.
Yeah.
So how do you see the growth of this field within like the next 10 years or so?
Huge. It's really interesting. In the last year to 2 years, I would say that the interest in nanomaterials and developing fundamental materials has increased exponentially. If you had asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have said it might not be a good career choice, but I think at this point, people are really recognizing that science is valuable to not only our economy, but our society. And that there is going to be a lot of careers in this area very, very shortly. And yeah, I've found that it's officially gotten to a point where there's more careers than there are people.
Somebody else asked, what are some things that you struggled on in your journey to becoming a nanotech chemist?
That's a good question. There's definitely a few. I would say that in general, transitioning from academia into industry was the most difficult part of my journey. Academia is in some ways kind of a safe place, and industry is a little bit less safe in the sense that there's less people around, there's less oversight, you're no longer in these big unions surrounded by people that are all your own age. And I found that understanding the culture of that and fitting in, particularly as a woman, was not as easy as I would have liked it to be.
And what are some of the typical co-op opportunities or internships that you can get while studying in university at Waterloo or just any other university in general?
Yeah, I have worked with a whole bunch of people from Waterloo, so that's a great place to go and do internships. Some of the fields that I've pulled people from is they have a nano engineering field actually, and so they have some really good co-op opportunities. I did all of my undergraduate experience in academia, and so I decided to not do a co-op, but rather use undergraduate research summer awards. So if I don't know if anybody would be familiar with USRAs, like undergraduate summer research awards that are from either NSERC or your university. But essentially what happens is every summer you can apply for them, you find a prof that you want to work with, and then you get paid for the summer to do research as an undergrad. And so I did that in my second, third, and fourth year, and that's how I got the experience that I did in the lab. But co-op programs are great for that too, and the pay is better, honestly. So.
What was your family's reaction to when you switched from becoming a nurse to becoming a nanotech chemist?
That's a good question. They really had no idea what I was doing when I switched. Like now, I think that my parents do understand. Well, my mom understands. My dad has passed a little bit about what I do. But yeah, they were surprised. My mom actually came to my very first chemistry. Well, my mom and dad showed up to my very first chemistry presentation to come and check it out, though. They were super supportive. I think I mentioned that, yeah, none of my family had gone to university, so this was all really new for them, and really, they had nothing but support and curiosity.
I think those are all the questions from the chat. Another question I had personally was, what are some ways that like students either in high school or in university, how can they explore their interests in the nanotechnology field?
That's a good question. I think that right now it's really about doing some research and Googling and checking out things. I think that at this exact moment, there isn't the same opportunities where you can go and volunteer in labs just as we're getting out of the pandemic. But once we're out of the pandemic, I would say the first thing that you should go and do is start doing science competitions and things like that. They didn't do them so much in my school where I grew up, but I have found that it's so impressive to see what some of the high school kids are doing with their simple science projects that they're presenting at. And I've actually gotten to know some undergrads through those things, because usually they pull volunteer judges from here and there. And I think that getting to know some of those people, having those conversations is a great place to start. Yeah, volunteering is also like a huge thing that I would say that everybody should be doing. If you're curious about something, the best way to learn is to volunteer to do something. I love to learn while doing.
And also, how would you say, like, how would you describe the gender gap in nanotechnology, or like, do you have any personal experiences that you're willing to share about?
Yeah, I mean, the gender gap in nanotech is definitely real. There is, so in my last position, there was 2 full-time women and 35 full-time men. And so it can be daunting. And I think that you do have to have a little bit tougher skin to get into industry here than I'd like it to be for women. But at the same point, there's a lot of things that are happening to improve that. And I think that it really is a role-to-role situation. I think that there are some workplaces that you're going to find that are so diversity friendly, regardless of that diversity being from your gender or from any other status that you claim. And so others are just going to be bad. And I think that that's pretty indiscriminate of what field you are in.
And this would be the final question, unless anybody else has any questions in the chat. But what do you think is the most exciting thing about nanotechnology, and something that you just find very beautiful about the career?
I just think that nanotech is super fun because nobody really knows what they're doing. So I've always loved a challenge, and I've always liked to theorize on solutions, especially when nobody can prove you wrong. So yeah, it's an amazing field for innovation.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, everyone. And thank you so much to Dr. Brandy Kinkead for creating this presentation for us and answering all of our questions.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye everyone. Have a great evening.
Take care.